मम ज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपा कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतापदकमलं श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगणरघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवम् साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपादान् सहगणललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च। हे कृष्णा करुणा सिन्धो दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपेशा गोपिकान्ता राधाकान्ता नमोऽस्तुते। तप्तकाञ्चन गौरङ्गी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। पञ्चकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनित्यनामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वतीदेवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंदा। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। विष्णुपदाय कृष्ण पृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते स्वामी नित्य नामने विष्णुपदाय कृष्ण पृष्ठाय भूतले खुदाचार्य द्वैत स्वामी नित्य। Thank you everyone for joining. So today we will be covering Canto 3, Chapter 26, which is entitled Fundamental Principles of Material Nature, verses 4 to 5. So before I share my screen and go through the verses, what I wanted to do is just do a quick recap summary, just so that we know where we're at in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So we're in the beginnings of a conversation between Devahuti and Kapila Dev or Kapila Muni. And this conversation actually starts with Devahuti inquiring about liberation. And this comes about all the way in some earlier chapters, whereby Kardama Muni had just given up family life, he had renounced and left Devahuti alone with their son Kapila. And Devahuti, after Kardama Muni had left, was meditating, was contemplating, was recalling the instructions that she got from both Kardama Muni and especially Lord Brahma. And when she was remembering the instructions from Lord Brahma, she was recalling specifically the prophecy that Lord Brahma had given about Kapila, about how Kapila Muni would practically help enlighten the whole world, but specifically in the previous chapters rather, we hear about how Lord Brahma prophesizes that Kapila will cut off the knots of ignorance and doubt for Devahuti. And so as Devahuti is remembering this, she then approaches Kapila with the mood of wanting Kapila Muni to enlighten her about how to become free from the material conditionings, how to become free from the entanglements with the material energy, and ultimately how to become free from the suffering that we all experience from the dualities of the world. And so in the last chapter, we hear about Devahuti approaching Kapila and then Kapila starting his response. And as part of that response, he starts with appreciation, a Mangalacharan almost, and then even a quick snippet of the entire spiritual journey of the Sambandha, or the relationship between the living entity and the Lord and the world around us. Then the Abhidheya, the practice by which one can come closer to the Lord. And then the Prayojana, the perfection that one attains when one is in full self-realization. And after that, Devahuti then also starts inquiring a bit more about the details that Kapila had shared. And the details Kapila was sharing was actually the process or the practice of devotional service, and how one can attain devotional service through association with pure devotees. And so as Devahuti inquires, then Kapila goes even deeper, we see how conversations through the scriptures and even in day-to-day conversations, we start off by sharing some exchange, and then each time a question is asked, we start going into deeper and deeper layers of understanding that same topic. And the same happens here between Devahuti and Kapila. So then Kapila basically gives a very, in a few, I don't know, 10, 15 verses or something, he basically describes what devotional service is the best type of devotional service. Summarized we hear in the Bhagavad Gita, Manmana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskaru mame veshyasi tattam te pratijane priyosi me. We hear in the Bhagavad Gita, in very famous verse, about how one should always think of Krishna, one should become Krishna's devotee, one should worship Krishna and offer their obeisances to Krishna. And in that way, one can basically attain the perfection of devotional service and go back to Krishna Loka. And after doing that, what we see is that Kapila then starts to introduce the idea of Sankhya Yoga. And Sankhya Yoga, or Sankhya literally means to break things down into their constituent components. So Sankhya Yoga is basically breaking down the path of devotional service or the path of perfection, self-realization, into its constituent components. And part of that includes understanding the world around us, understanding where we're at in our own spiritual journey. And so it's a very analytical study of material nature and the path of devotional service. And in the first three, if I just share my screen, in the first three verses of chapter 26, which is entitled Fundamental Principles of Material Nature, what we see is in the first three verses is that Kapila basically describes the different categories or the different ways that we can see the Lord. And the ultimate conclusion that we see here is that the Supreme Lord or Krishna is everywhere and his energy is everywhere. And yet Krishna is beyond everything, right? The absolute truth is basically beyond material nature, or Adokshaja as is described, but yet he's present everywhere through his self-effulgent luster, through his own effulgence. And then we come to verses 4 and 5. Would anybody like to volunteer to read the Sanskrit and the translation?
Hare Krishna, may I?
Yes, go ahead.
Hare Krishna. Sa isa prakritim shukshmam devim guna mahim vibhu yadricha yevopagatam abhyapadayata lilaya. Do you want to read the translation as well?
Yes, please.
As this pastime, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the greatest of the great, accepted the subtle material energy which is invested with three material modes of nature and which is related to Vishnu.
Thank you very much. Anybody like to read the first paragraph of the purport?
Hare Krishna, I can read
Yes.
that. Purport. In this verse, the word Gunamayam is very significant. Devim means the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and Gunamayim means invested with three modes of material nature. When the material energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead appears, this Gunamayam energy acts as manifestation of the energies of the three modes. It acts as a covering. The energy emanated from the Supreme Personality of Godhead manifests in two ways: as an emanation from the Supreme Lord and as a covering of the Lord's face. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said that because the whole world illusioned by the three modes of material nature, the common conditioned soul, being covered by such an energy, cannot see the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The example of a cloud is very nicely given. All of a sudden, there may appear a big cloud in the sky. This cloud is perceived in two ways. To the sun, the cloud is a creation of his energy, but to the ordinary common man in the conditioned state, it is a covering to the eyes because of the cloud, the sun cannot be seen. It is not that the sun is actually covered by the cloud, only the vision of the ordinary being is covered. Similarly, although Maya cannot cover the Supreme Lord, who is beyond Maya, the material energy covers the ordinary living entities. Those conditioned souls who are covered are individual living entities, and he from those energy, Maya, is created, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Mataji. So before I get to the first part of the purport, what I really find interesting here is that the very last word is called Leelaya, and Srila Prabhupada starts off his purport, his translation, as his pastime. When we think about the word pastime or the word Leela in a material concept, what comes to mind for anyone? If somebody thinks about Leela or pastime, or if we translate pastime in a more commonly used term, right? Some passing time or some play, what sort of thing would come to mind? So one that comes to mind for me is children playing at the beach or in a sandpit. When we see passing time, when we see playfulness, we see children often associated to playfulness. Because what happens on the beach, what happens in a sandpit is that children will create a sandcastle or something out of the sand, right? A very nice structure, something that they can play with, something that they know is temporary for their enjoyment. It has no real significance, no real implication for them. And what happens at the end of the day? After a few hours, the parents come and say, okay, it's time to go home. And so the children just leave everything behind, leave the sandcastle that they've spent, hour or however long building with nice details sometimes with their bucket and their spade and the different items that they've brought. But they just leave it behind and just go. They just go back home. And it's interesting because here we see that the Supreme Lord is, if we take that same concept, we see that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the greatest of the great, accepted the subtle material energy which is invested with the three material modes of nature and which is related with Vishnu. We see that the Supreme Lord has that same experience with the material world. The material world is just like a sandcastle for the Supreme Lord, whereby just for play, even though it's temporary, but just for play, he creates this world just to enjoy with it. And then when we get into the purport, we see the very first thing that Srila Prabhupada talks about is the energies of the Lord, and specifically the material energy. So we understand that there are different ways that we can understand the Lord's energies, and one very common way that the Lord's energies are categorized is through the Antaranga, the Bahiranga, and the Tatashta Shaktis, right? Antaranga means the internal potency, the internal energy of the Lord. So it's his direct spiritual energy. Then we have the Bahiranga energy, the Bahiranga Shakti, and that is the Lord's external energy or the material energy. And then we've got the Tatashta Shakti, which is the Lord's marginal energy. So that's where the living entities fall under. And this marginal energy is actually part of the spiritual, part of the Antaranga, the internal energy, but it's specifically defined differently because it is minute in quantity. And so when we look at the Bahiranga energy or the external energy, the material energy, we see that a part of that is this here, the Gunamayim energy, which manifests. So part of the material energy is also or a big prominent part of the material energy is the Guna energy, the energy of the three modes of nature. And what does that do? Shripad says it acts as a covering. That the external energy of the Lord, which is the three modes are a part of, it acts as a covering. And what does it cover? It says here, the energy emanated from the Supreme Personality of God manifests in three ways: as an emanation from the Supreme Lord and as a covering of the Lord's face. So the three modes of nature actually covers the vision of the Lord for the living entity. So we see that the tatashta, or the marginal energy of the Lord, is minute in quantity, but the same in quality as the Lord. And because of its minute quantity, actually has the ability to become influenced by the material energy. And so that's what stops us from seeing the Lord. When we talk about Maya or the Maya Shakti, there's actually two types of Maya Shakti. One is called Mahamaya and the other is called Yoga Maya. Yoga Maya we see is actually a covering of, it's a facilitation of the Lord's pastimes and arranging sweet, sweet interactions between the Lord and his devotees by creating a covering whereby the devotees and even the Lord himself forgets the Lord's supremacy. In Krishna Lila, we see there's so many pastimes, so many sweet interactions between Krishna and his devotees, where Krishna tries his best to show that I am the Supreme Lord, but the devotees just have none of it because they cannot see Krishna in that majestic or supreme form, because they don't have that awareness because they're covered by that Yogamaya Shakti. If we look at the pastime of lifting of the Govardhan hill, we see for 7 days, 7 nights, Lord Krishna is picking up or lifting up the Govardhan hill with the little finger, the pinky finger of his left hand. And in different pastimes or different acharyas have described how sometimes he's playfully like, all the Vrajavasis are saying, oh, Krishna, you get tired, we'll put sticks up, right? So all the Vrajavasis are holding sticks. And Krishna just very playfully just releases his finger slightly and all the sticks start to shake, because obviously a hill versus, however many sticks there are, the hill is going to outweigh the sticks and cause the sticks to snap. And then the Vrajavasis are, oh, no, Krishna, you keep hold the Govardhan hill. Then at the end of the 7 days, we see Yashoda Ma is coming to Krishna and being like, oh my gosh, you've not eaten for 7 days. And she feeds him 7 times a day, or 8 times. Yeah, one of those, 7 or 8 times a day. And Madhumangal is there going, no. Krishna didn't lift the hill at all. It was actually my Brahminical Shakti that held the hill up. So like this, we see that the Vrajavasi's love for Krishna is so much so, and it's all facilitated and arranged by Yogamaya, that even though Krishna is performing these supremely and majestic activities, they can't see it because their awareness of the Lord's majesty is just not there, because Yogamaya has covered it. And Yogamaya has covered it in order to facilitate the transcendental and sweet pastimes between the Lord and his devotees. So that's Yoga Maya. But then we've got another type of Maya, which is called Mahamaya. And Mahamaya covers the conditioned soul from being able to see Krishna. That covering is such that it binds the conditioned soul to the material illusion, whereby we start considering ourselves to be Krishna itself. We consider ourselves to be the supreme controller, the enjoyer, the doer of everything that we interact with. And why is that? Because we have no vision of the absolute truth. And we see how that manifests in the world around us. We see that when we look at the materialists, we see that their ignorance of the absolute truth makes them believe that there is no God, right? If we look at the atheists, their ignorance, their lack of vision makes them believe that there is no God. And so what's their philosophy of life? Their philosophy is that the world is there to facilitate the enjoyment of myself, of my senses, of my mind. And from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 16, we understand that all of that is rooted in sex desire. If we look at the impersonalists or the mental speculators, we see that their philosophy of life is that there is no God, or we are all God, or we are all part of the same energy. And so then that ignorance creates even more confusion, because then what's the difference between the body and the self? What's the difference between matter and spirit? What's the difference between the soul and the super soul? How is it that the soul, who is meant to be the super soul, can fall under the influence of matter? And so like this, so much confusion gets created from the lack of awareness of the absolute truth and the lack of understanding. And so Srila Prabhupada uses this very nice analogy of here, the example of a cloud is very nicely given. All of a sudden, there may appear a big cloud in the sky. This cloud is perceived in two ways. To the sun, the cloud is a creation of its energy, but to the ordinary common man in the conditioned state, it is a covering to the eyes. Because of the cloud, the sun cannot be seen. It's a very nice example, because if we think about the cloud, right? If we think about the sun, then us standing on planet Earth, okay, UK is a bit of an anomaly because we very rarely see the sun, although nowadays it's been coming out a fair bit. But if we were out looking at the sun and then some clouds came, from our perspective, we'd be saying that the sun is covered by the cloud. But actually, is the sun covered? No. It's our vision as the seer that's covered and stopping us from seeing the sun. Because if we look from the sun's perspective, we understand that the sun is so huge and the cloud is just an insignificant object. So how can an insignificant object such as the cloud actually cover the sun? It only covers our vision. And so in the Bhagavad Gita, we understand Krishna says, Devi Hesha Gunamai Mama Maya Duratyaya Mamevaya Prapadyante Maya Metam Tarantite. He says that this divine energy of mine, the Devi Hesha Gunamai, which consists of the three modes of material nature, is very difficult to overcome. But those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that actually this divine energy, the three modes of nature, the material energy, is actually my own energy. And if it's his own energy, then how can Krishna be covered by his own energy? If he's covered by his own energy, then that must be to facilitate a divine pastime, which means it's Yogamaya. But the Mahamaya cannot cover Krishna, because that is actually just a covering for the souls, for the living entities. Because Krishna, we understand, is adokshaja, he's beyond the material energy. And so the Lord isn't actually covered, it's just our vision that becomes covered. And because our vision becomes covered, what happens is that it causes misconceptions, it causes misinterpretations, it causes misunderstandings, and ultimately it creates a illusion and an ignorance where we start to consider that the matter or the body is the self, is the spiritual essence. It creates this illusion whereby everything around us that we cast our eye on, cast our thought on, is permanent. And it creates this shadow of a misunderstanding that gets created for us, where we start treating this world as the real world instead of as a hotel that we're passing through to get to the real destination. And so here we see these conditioned souls who are covered are individual living entities, and he from whose energy Maya is created is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we see that we as the living entities, we can become, as conditioned souls, we can become covered by the Maya energy, but the Supreme Lord is actually beyond it. Anybody like to read the second paragraph? No? Okay. In another place in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the first canto, 7th chapter, it is stated that Vyasadeva, by his spiritual vision, saw the Supreme Lord and the material energy standing behind him. This indicates that material energy cannot cover the Lord, just as darkness cannot cover the sun. Darkness can cover a jurisdiction which is very insignificant in comparison to that of the sun. Darkness can cover a small cave, but not the open sky. Similarly, the covering capacity of the material energy is limited and cannot act on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is therefore called Vibhu. As the appearance of a cloud is accepted by the sun, so the appearance of the material energy at a certain interval is accepted by the Lord. Although his material energy is utilized to create the material world, this does not mean that he is covered by that energy. Those who are covered by the material energy are called conditioned souls. The Lord accepts the material energy for his material pastime in creation, maintenance, and dissolution. But the conditioned soul is covered. He cannot understand that beyond this material energy, there is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the cause of all causes. Just as a less intelligent person cannot understand that beyond the covering of the clouds, there is bright sunshine. So here we see how, in the very beginning, we hear about this idea of darkness and light. How can darkness exist if there is, or where there is light? In this section, what we really hear is how the light of Krishna consciousness can dissipate the darkness. If we were in a room that had no lights on, right? If we entered a dark room, then how would we navigate ourselves through the room? Well, we'd turn on the light, right? If we wanted to dissipate the darkness so that we can see, so we can navigate, so that we can understand what is what in the room, we'd find the switch to turn on the light. In the same way, as we're navigating through the world, if we want to dissipate the darkness of ignorance and speculation, then one has to turn on the light of Krishna consciousness. And there's so many ways to do that, right? One is switching on the light. If the sun was out, you could open the curtains and so many things. In the same way, with Krishna consciousness, we see that there's so many ways to turn on the light of Krishna consciousness. There are so many avenues given by which one can connect with Krishna. We see the importance of service, whereby by engaging our mind and our senses in the service to the Supreme, ignorance becomes destroyed. And we see in this paragraph also the importance of cannot act as who is difficult as the appearances, so the appearances. Those who are covered by the material energy are called conditioned souls. The Lord accepts the material energy for his material pastimes in creation, maintenance, and dissolution. But the conditioned soul is covered. He cannot understand that beyond this material energy, there is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the cause of all causes. Just as a less intelligent person cannot understand that beyond the covering of the clouds, there is bright sunshine. Through the cultivation of spiritual knowledge of Krishna and the process of Krishna consciousness, what we can see is that the clouds can become uncovered, going back to the analogy of the cloud and the sun and the seer of the sun. When the sun starts shining through the cloud, and that becomes prominent, that becomes a stronger presence for our eyes, we see that the effect of the clouds become weaker, and eventually the sunshine actually breaks through the cloud. In the same way, if our connection with Krishna, who is sun-like, becomes stronger, then we see that through that connection, we start seeing Krishna, we start experiencing Krishna in our life more and more. And that weakens the covering of ignorance that that we're living in because of our conditioned nature, because of the influence of the Maya Shakti, until eventually the clouds will completely dissipate and completely break up such that the sun can shine through. And at that point, we find ourselves living completely in Krishna consciousness, where there is no cloud of ignorance that oversees us, that overlooks our life. And so in this verse, what we very much see is how the energy of the Lord, the external energy, or the Maya energy, or the Gunamayim energy of the Lord, is there to facilitate the covering of the conditioned soul and covering their vision of the absolute truth. But at the same time, Srila Prabhupada very nicely and very sweetly gives us the way by which we can undo that covering, which is by turning on the light of Krishna consciousness. By letting Krishna enter our life more and more, we find that the ignorance of that darkness starts to dissipate. And then in verse 5, anybody like to read the Sanskrit? Oh, quiet crowd today. Okay. Gune vichitra jatim sarupa prakritim praja vilokya mumuhe sadhya sahya jnana guhaya. Translation: divided into varieties by her threefold modes, material nature creates the forms of the living entities, and the living entities, seeing this, are illusioned by the knowledge covering feature of the illusory energy. Purple. Material energy has the power to cover knowledge, but this covering cannot be applied to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is applicable only to the praja, or those who are born with material bodies, the conditioned souls. The different kinds of living entities vary according to the modes of material nature, as explained in Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic literature. In Bhagavad Gita 7.12, it is very nicely explained that although the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance are born of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is not subject to them. In other words, the energy emanating from the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot act on him. It acts on the conditioned souls who are covered by the material energy. The Lord is the father of all living entities because he impregnates material energy with the conditioned father, he impregnates material with the conditioned souls. Therefore, the conditioned souls get bodies created by the material energy, whereas the father of the living entities is aloof from the three modes. So before I go on, we see in verse 4, we see that the Lord has basically associated with the material energy just as a plaything, just as accepted the material energy as a temporary pastime for enjoyment. And then verse 5, what we see is that we now move on to seeing how the material energy becomes the mother of the living entities because the material nature creates the form or the bodies for the living entities. And therefore, the Supreme Lord becomes the father of the living entities. And in that way, what we see is that different kinds of living entities vary according to the modes of material nature. We'll see later on in the purport how it's described that 8.4 million species of life are created through the interactions of the three modes of nature. We understand that the three modes are sattva or goodness, rajas or passion, and tamas or ignorance. And one might naively think that, oh, these are three different categories. They are mutually exclusive categories, that something or someone can be in the mode of goodness or in the mode of passion or in the mode of ignorance. But what we see is that the three modes are not mutually exclusive. They're not categories that live independently of each other. But actually, there's an interplay between them. There's an ongoing competition and an ongoing mixing of the three modes. And because of that mixing, we come to 8.4 million species of life that are created by the different combinations of the three modes. And in other scriptures, the three modes are further divided into different ways or different subcategories. So then we can see how the modes are combined. A very simple way to see it also is that one may do an activity such as devotional service. One may engage in, take myself, one may engage in sharing or speaking on Krishna Katha. And that arguably would be in the mode of goodness or even pure goodness. But with that activity comes other subtleties that are involved. For example, what is the via medium that I'm sharing that knowledge? Well, we're on the internet, we're on a Zoom call or a YouTube video, which means that we're utilizing the mode of passion. We're utilizing material energy, which comes from creation and mankind, which means it's mode of passion. We see that my mentality also comes into play. If I'm sitting here giving this talk because I think I'm an excellent speaker, or because I think I've got something very valuable to share and it's only I can share this, then we can see that that could be passion/ignorance. But if I'm approaching in this mood of I'm here to learn, I'm here to share what I have learned from my teachers, I'm here to discuss the spiritual knowledge and grow and educate myself, then that could be in the mode of goodness or the mode of pure goodness. So we see even in just everyday activities, if we look at the different factors and the different subtleties that are involved in each and everything that we do, or each and every thought we have, we can appreciate how there is not just one mode that's influencing us at any moment in time. Actually, it's a combination of the modes that influence our activities, our mindset, our interactions with the world. And so when we look at that, then we see that there are 8.4 million species of life that come from the combinations. And that is all to facilitate the combination of the desires and the combination of the karmic reactions that the living entity is meant to go through. And so here, the energy emanating from the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot act on him. It acts on the conditioned souls who are covered by the material energy. We see that it comes back to how the living entity is covered or is influenced by the material energy. Whereas here, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the energy emanating from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, i.e. the Gunamaya or the Maya Shakti, cannot act on him. We see that the Lord is actually beyond the three modes. He is transcendental to the material world. If we look at it another way, something more relatable, we see that there's so many corporate companies in the material world. And we see that each of those corporate companies, or at least many of them, will have a chairman. And the chairman will prescribe, maybe not directly, but at least indirectly, the different rules, the different laws, the different policies and regulations by which the company operates. And we see that all of those different rules apply to the employees, but not to the chairman, not to the owner itself. And the chairman remains aloof from all of this. In the same way, in the last sentence, we see, therefore the conditioned souls get bodies created by the material energy, whereas the father of the living entities is aloof from the three modes. In the same way, we see that the chairman, i.e. Krishna, has created this material world. And with that has created these different cosmic laws and rules and regulations, of which one is that a living entity must have material bodies created by the material energy, but that same law does not apply to the Supreme Lord because he is above the laws of the world, just as a chairman is aloof or beyond the laws of the company. And then we go on to the next one. It is stated in the previous verse that the material energy was accepted by the Supreme Personality of Godhead in order that he might exhibit pastimes for the living entities who wanted to enjoy and lord it over the material energy. This world was created through the material energy of the Lord for the so-called enjoyment of such living entities. why this material world was created for the sufferings of the conditioned souls is a very intricate question. There is a hint in the previous verse in the word lilaya, which means for the pastimes of the Lord. The Lord wants to rectify the enjoying temperament of the conditioned souls. It is stated in Bhagavad Gita that no one is the enjoyer but the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This material energy is therefore created for anyone who pretends to enjoy. An example can be cited here that there is no necessity for the government's creation of a separate police department, but because it is a fact that some of the citizens will not accept the state laws, a department to deal with criminals is necessary. There is no necessity, but at the same time, there is a necessity. Similarly, there was no necessity to create this material world for the sufferings of the conditioned souls. But at the same time, there are certain living entities known as Nitya-Baddha who are eternally conditioned. We say that they have been conditioned from time immemorial because no one can trace out when the living entity, the part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, became rebellious against the supremacy of the Lord. We see that we come back to this idea of the Leela, or the Leelaya, because here what we're considering in the second paragraph is, why did the Lord create the material world in the first place? And it is all for enjoyment, right? For the pastimes of the Lord. But specifically, when we look at the creation of the material world, as we go through this paragraph and even other places from the Bhagavatam and Srila Prabhupada's purports, we see that whenever we talk about the material world and the creation of the material world, we often come across this point that it's all to facilitate the desire for independent enjoyment, right? Which is lila in one sense. The idea of enjoying oneself is lila. But lila specifically becomes transcendental when it's associated to the Lord. But when it becomes associated to the living entity, we don't really refer to it as lila, which, because we understand that it's not a pastime of our choosing in the real sense. And so when we look at the creation of the material world, we see that the age-old debate comes up of the fall of the jiva, where Srila Prabhupada, some of our acharyas have spoken about how the living entities were once in the material world, enjoying themselves and fully relishing their relationship, their connection, their service to Krishna and the other devotees. But at some point, even momentarily, there was a contemplation, there was a thought. What would it be like to enjoy independently of Krishna? And out of Krishna's love, Krishna then goes on to create this entire material world, this entire playground, or this entire sandcastle, just to facilitate that desire of ours so that we can pretend to be enjoyers. And when we look at Bhagavad Gita chapter 5, we see that there's the very nice peace formula at the very end. Bhoktaram yagna tapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram suridam sarvabhutanam nyatva mam shantim richati. We see in that peace formula where it's described that those who know Krishna as the ultimate purpose of all sacrifices and austerities, those who know that the Supreme Lord, that Krishna is the Supreme Lord of all planets and demigods, and is the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, such a person can actually attain true peace from the pangs of material miseries. One who understands the supremacy of Krishna, one who understands that actually Krishna is the ultimate enjoyer of everything, they have the ability, they have the opportunity to actually become peaceful. And so here we see that the material world is created in order for the conditioned souls to carry out their desire of independently enjoying. Because the spiritual world is a place where the center of attention, the object of all service, the object of all worship is Krishna. But when one no longer wants to or can no longer keep Krishna in the center, even momentarily, they divert their attention away. Then Krishna very kindly creates a place to facilitate that desire of ours to not put Krishna in the center. And Srila Prabhupada gives a very nice example again about the government and the police department, right? The government creation of a separate police department. We see that if all of the citizens of the country had complete faith in the government, and obviously if the government was completely honorable in its own way, if it was a perfect government and the citizens perfectly followed the government's rules and regulations, and everything that the individual was doing was supportive of the progression of the country, of the progression of the government, and creating peace and prosperity for everyone, every living entity, then we see that a police department has no business there. It has no need to exist. But because there are individuals, because there are people who don't want to follow the rules of the government, then the police department is created in order to keep those people in check. In the same way, the material world actually has no reason to exist because all of us living entities come from the spiritual world. But because we develop this contemplation or even this desire to not follow the ways of the spiritual world, where Krishna is at the center, where the devotees are fully engaged in hearing, chanting, serving Krishna and the other devotees. And we have then developed this desire that what would it be like if I was to be served, if I was at the center of the universe? Then Krishna creates that police department or the material world in order to keep us in check. So next paragraph. It is a fact that there are two classes of men, those who are obedient to the laws of the Supreme Lord and those who are atheists or agnostics, who do not accept the existence of God and who want to create their own laws. They want to establish that everyone can create his own laws or his own religious path. Without tracing out the beginning of the existence of these two classes, we can take it for granted that some of the living entities revolted against the laws of the Lord. Such entities are called conditioned souls, for they are conditioned by the three modes of material nature. Therefore, the words gune vichitra used here. We can look at this paragraph and see that, okay, Srila Prabhupada's talking about two classes of men, right? Those who are obedient to the laws of the Supreme Lord, i.e. the devotees, and those who are atheists and agnostics who do not accept the existence of God and who want to create their own laws. We can see that there's a separation here that Srila Prabhupada gives where you've got the devotees and then the atheists and agnostics on the other side. And we can look at this paragraph or similar sort of narrations or explanations by Srila Prabhupada and think, oh yeah, we fall into the category of the devotees because we're following Krishna's orders. We're endeavoring to follow the Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and all the other literatures. But something my spiritual master would often say when we read or study the Srimad Bhagavatam and when he gives classes is that he really appreciates and values the Srimad Bhagavatam because, and not just the Bhagavatam, but any of the literatures, because actually spiritual life is a transformative process, right? It's a process whereby introspection is the key to progression, not projecting and not seeing what we're reading as armchair philosophy. And so when we introspect, when we look at this paragraph or this section, this idea of the atheists and the agnostics who do not accept the existence of God and who want to create their own laws, and we look at this description and introspect on it, what we can think about is, are we carrying or are we navigating through the world in the garb or a disguise of a devotee, but actually internally in our mind, in our mentality, in our philosophy, we're actually carrying a lot of atheism or agnosticism. Because at the heart, what does it mean to be a devotee? It means that we are keeping Krishna, we are keeping pleasing the devotees, we are keeping the instructions of Krishna and the devotees at the center of our life. And everything we do in life is dictated by that. Whereas the mentality or the center of the atheistic and the agnostic mentality is dictated by the mind, the senses, and the false ego. So when we introspect, we can think about how much of our life is actually dictated by Krishna consciousness versus I or my or the worldly consciousness. And sometimes, as devotees, and myself included, sometimes we can find ourselves in situations where we're engaging in this something called spiritual bypassing, whereby we think we're being very spiritual, we think we're being very Krishna conscious and Krishna focused, where we may be going through a difficulty, a struggle through life, and we're just approaching, okay, just chant and be happy. So we just approach our bead bag, go to a kirtan festival, and just fully immerse ourselves, ignoring everything else that has happened in life. And then we think, at the end of the day, we think, wow, I've transcended, I've advanced so much that it doesn't even bother me anymore what's going on in life around me. But actually, that's quite dangerous because that can be considered what we think is spiritual advancement could actually be our immature neglect of our situations. We see that spiritual maturity comes not from 24/7 engaging in Krishna conscious activities, but by looking at life, by seeing what cards Krishna is dealing to us in a way where we're constantly thinking and meditating on what is it that Krishna wants me to learn here? What is it that Krishna wants me to understand? How is it that Krishna wants me to grow? And so we're then spiritually maturing by dealing with the cards Krishna has given us to come closer to him, not just by our activities or the dress that we wear, but also by the mentality and the philosophy, because we're thinking, what does Krishna want of me? And so we're not using spiritual practices to then escape from situations, but we're using our spiritual practices to grow closer to Krishna in those negative situations. And so in this paragraph, at least what I take away is that it's very important that as devotees, we continue to look deep within, we continue to introspect and rip out all those weeds that cause that agnostic or atheistic philosophy, where we actually put I, me, mine in the center, and where we sometimes even immaturely misunderstand or misapply the scriptures by, in quotes, transcending the situations around us when actually our mentality is still very much engrossed in it, but we're just escaping from the situations in order to be seen as a spiritually advanced person. So conscious of time. So the last two paragraphs. Yeah, two paragraphs. In this material world, there are 8.4 million species of life. As a super soul, they are all transcendental to this material world. Why then do they exhibit themselves in different stages of life? The answer is given here. They're under the spell of the three modes of material nature. So as we spoke about before, 8.4 million species, all associated or all influenced by the three modes and created in that way because of that, the three modes. Because they were created by the material energy, their bodies are made of the material elements. Covered by the material body, the spiritual identity is lost, and therefore the word mumuhe is used here, indicating that they have forgotten their own spiritual identity. This forgetfulness of spiritual identity is present in the jivas or souls who are conditioned being subject to be covered by the energy of material nature. Jnana guhaya is another word used. Guha means covering. Because the knowledge of the minute conditioned souls is covered, they are exhibited in so many species of life. It is said in the Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st canto, 7th chapter, the living entities are illusioned by the material energy. In the Vedas also, it is stated that the eternal living entities are covered by different modes and that they are called tree-colored, red, white, and blue living entities. Red is the representation of the mode of passion, white is the representation of the mode of goodness, and blue is the representation of the mode of ignorance. These modes of material nature belong to the material energy, and therefore the living entities under these different modes of material nature have different kinds of material bodies. Because they are forgetful of their spiritual identities, they think the material bodies to be themselves. To the conditioned soul, me means the material body. This is called moha, bewilderment. It is repeatedly said in the Katha Upanishad that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is never affected by the influence of material nature. It is rather the conditioned souls or the minute infinitesimal parts and parcels of the Supreme who are affected by the influence of material nature and who appear in different bodies under the material modes. So we see through these two verses, these two paragraphs, that the misconception of the body as the self instead of seeing the soul as the self, and we say that the cause of that conditioning is basically, as Sri Prabhupada calls it, the bewilderment that that the conditioned soul undergoes, confusing matter to be spirit. And in the last section, we see that how the Lord is actually just not affected by any of this because he's, again, beyond, right? He's never affected by the influence of the material nature because, as we mentioned earlier, the Lord is a Dokshaja. He's beyond the material modes, beyond the material energy. But the conditioned souls are the minute infinitesimal parts and parcels of the Supreme who are affected by the influence of material nature and who appear in different bodies under the material modes. They are affected. When we consider the misidentification, we see that that misidentification is very prominently seen through an example of a driver and a car. When one wants to drive from London to Manchester, we say that I am driving the car, right? We don't say I car. We say that I am driving the car because we recognize intrinsically that there's a difference between the driver and the car or the machine. But if one is so illusioned that they misunderstand or mistake that the machine that is taking them from one place to another, from one location to another, is actually themselves, we understand that they've gone mad. Even from a material perspective, we'll call them, we'd consider that they've got some madness in them. But that same madness is applied to the bewilderment that we undergo, whereby we consider the body, which in the Bhagavad Gita is described to be a machine, to be the self, because the soul, who is us, the real me, the real I, is just going on a journey by using the body as a machine. And that journey can be one that takes us deeper and deeper into the trenches of material conditioning, of material entanglements, of Maya, of illusion. Or it can be a journey of transcendence whereby we use the same machine, the body, to then rise higher and higher, go even deeper and deeper in our connection with Krishna and our path of spiritual realization. So between the two verses, what we've basically covered is recognizing and seeing that the material world is just the Lord's external energy, right? We've learned and seen how, in the previous verse also, how that energy binds the conditioned soul. But the way to get out of that is by turning on the light of Krishna consciousness. And then we see how, through this verse here, how the Father, Krishna, and the material energy as the mother facilitates our desires, which is why the material world has even come to existence. But the Lord is never under the influence of the laws of the material world because he is beyond them. And one who engages in turning on the light of Krishna consciousness, they actually become free from the cycle of birth and death. They actually become free from the illusory energy of the Lord, and they have the opportunity to go back home, back to Godhead. So I will end there. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.